All right, everyone. So welcome to our next Unity tutorial. So in this one, we're going to go over colliders and gravity. So we're going to set up box colliders for some shapes so that our little square character here can actually collide and interact with things like walls and what will eventually be floors. And then we're also going to go over gravity. And then after this video, we're going to make some changes to the movement script in order to more closely emulate some platforming mechanics. So let's go ahead and get started with some colliders. So to start off, I'm going to create a new game object. I'm going to go to Game Object, 2D Object, Sprites, and I'm going to make another square. So this square I'm just going to create as a simple little, obstacle that our red square character can run into. I'm going to scale up the square a little bit. Let's move it around like this. I'm doing this by going over to the rectangle tool. So here in our little tools tab here, we have the view tool, move tool, rotate tool, scale tool, and rect tool. So rectangle tool is allowing me to freely manipulate this rectangle into any shape that I want. So I'm just going to put this, something like that for our square character to run into. So just really quick to review, we have our square character here that has a rigid body 2D on it, as well as the movement script that Ms. Kiselwitz went over with you. So for right now, let's go ahead and hit play. And just to show you what's going on here, we haven't added a collider yet. So our square here should just simply go across the other square shape, and sure enough, it does right on top of it. So obviously that's not what we want. We want our square to be able to run into things. So let's click play again, get back into the editor, and we're going to add a component. And I'm going to look for a collider, more specifically a box collider 2D, which is specifically for 2D shapes. So you'll notice here, it's tough to see, but there is if I do this, it'll be easier to see. You can see a little green rectangle around the our box here. And if I want, I can edit this collider by selecting the Edit Collider button here. And I could make changes to this, bring it down like that. So the collider would be, half the size of the rectangle, but I don't want that. I want this to be the entirety of the rectangle. So I'm going to bring it right up to there. Perfect. Now, you don't really need to worry too much about these settings right here. Like for example, is trigger. This is something we're going to go over later, so that if our character were to cross this box collider, it could trigger something to happen. But for right now, that's not what we're doing. We just want it to collide and not do anything else. So I have my collider. Let's go ahead and hit play and see what happens. Oh, whoops, I forgot to turn off gravity. I'll do that in a second. But notice how I added the collider, but the square is not interacting with it in any way. That is because our square character here doesn't have a collider. So in order for our square character to interact with anything with a collider, it itself needs to have a collider too. So let's go ahead and add that component. So I'm selecting our red square character. I'm going to add component, and I'm going to add another box collider, which gets automatically scaled to the size of the square. And before I forget, let me just turn off gravity entirely. Gravity scale set to 0. And now let's take a look what happens here. Now that we have two colliders active, you can see now that I am able to run into our little wall here. So by default, what's going to happen is when you get to an edge, you're going to be able to move like this and rotate the square. It'll be influenced by the colliders at the angle that you're moving. So we could spin the square like this and notice how it's just going to perpetually keep moving because there is no gravity applied to it. But let's say we don't want this to happen. We don't want our, our square character to be able to rotate like this. So what you're going to do is let's go ahead and click out of play. And you want to freeze rotation on the Z-axis. because if you notice, here is where we were seeing all of that rotation information occurring, was on the z-axis. So we're going to freeze rotation on the z-axis. So now when we hit play, it's just going to compile everything. And now you can see we can run into this wall here, and we don't have to worry about our character rotating at all. They're just going to keep running into that wall no matter how much of that wall they are touching until they can get around the obstacle. Perfect. So we got our first colliders in place. Let's go ahead and make another one. I'm going to select our box here. I'm going to hit Control D to duplicate the shape. Just move this around, and I'm going to use the rectangle tool to scale this how I want. And I'm just going to make like a small floor for us here, something like this. And I'm going to take our other one, and I'm just going to make it, kind of like an obstacle that we will eventually jump over right here. So let's go ahead and add gravity to our character here. So gravity scale, I'm going to increase this up to let's say, well, let's go to 10 for now. And let's hit play. So you can see gravity is taking effect, and our colliders is still working. Once it hits the bottom, it stops moving. Well, gravity is still applying force to it, but it's not unable to move because our box character and the floor has a collider. So I can still move upwards freely like this, though. It's kind of as if I'm like swimming. It very much feels like a underwater level in Mario at the moment, which is what we don't want for our platformer. We want it to be, more like when Mario is not in water and he's able to jump and stuff like that. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to go over how to change our movement script right here and make it so that it emulates a 2D platformer more. So we're going to only be able to move on the x-axis, and we're going to be able to jump.